Thank you so much once again for making the trip to Martha's Vineyard, a part of your history and the history and legend and lore of Linsey Lee and her beginnings here. I do want to hold up this book right here, which is what Mara's first article was written about, and it is for sale at the front desk and in the gift shop as well. We have limited copies. I don't know if we have 80 copies, but we have a lot. We have a lot of copies, and we're always going to get more, so you'll get one.
I wrote that book when I was
It's
1975. Yeah, came out in 75.
It's edible wild plants. So some of you I see were here for our lunch lecture today about foraging and wild and edible plants on Martha's Vineyard. She is also one of those experts here on Martha's Vineyard. So thank you again. I know you're here to celebrate 35 years of listening with Linsey Lee and her oral history, legendary oral histories. And we also have the delight of having a legend of NPR and so much legendary work and so much amazing work from Mara Liasson. So thank you so much for being here. And I welcome you to listen. And if there's water in the back of the room, again, if you had to pull it over, she did. So thank you so much for being here.
So thank you all for being here. It's a great turnout. I am so honored that I get to celebrate the incredible career of my friend Linsey Lee. Linsey Lee basically invented Martha's Vineyard oral history. And she has created over 35 years, actually much longer than that, and we'll explain how. But she's created a living archive of stories told in the first person through audio and video and print. And you'll see a lot of the people who are the subjects of her oral history behind us. She's also going to play some audio and video of oral histories, and at about 7 o'clock we're going to open it up for Q&A. Only someone with deep roots here and an abiding love for island life could have accomplished what she has done. And I met her, as Laurel said, in 1976. I was an intern at the Vineyard Gazette, and the very first article I ever wrote, my very first newspaper article at the Gazette, which you can see in that big archive book over there, was a profile of this young woman you were 21, I was 20. It just shows you that if you live long enough, they put you in a museum. And we knew each other a little.
We did.
Well, a little. And she'd written this incredible book on the wild edible plants of Martha's Vineyard, which has never gone out of print. And you can buy it in the gift shop. And I interviewed her, and we became friends, and we've been friends for 50 years, whatever we are at, 48. And the thing that was amazing about the wild edible plants of Martha's Vineyard is I apparently, in the article, made a mistake. And I suggested that on the beach plums, that the flowers and the fruit were there at the same time, which of course is biologically not possible. I think they were just curled up, dried little flowers.
No, they were. I was showing both stages of the plant.
Yeah. And she illustrated this book, by the way. She wrote it and illustrated it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And this was a time on the vineyard, late 70s. A lot of people, young people, who had either come here in the summers, were deciding to move here and live year-round. They were attracted to what they thought island life would be. A lot of them didn't stay. After all, it is cold here in the winter, and there are very few jobs. But there are many of them, like Linsey Lee, who burrowed into the community and created lasting institutions, and in her case, a documentary record of vineyard life and history. So that's what we're going to talk about. And the first thing I want to ask you is how you ended up doing this. What I didn't realize is that you had, long before you came to the museum, you had an archive of 75 interviews that you'd done from 79 to 83. So how did you end up being an oral historian?
All my life, we came to the vineyard for a little bit of the summer, and so I had this dream about, okay, someday I'm going to move to the vineyard, and I'm going to write books and draw pictures, and so I did that. 2 years after I got out of high school, I moved down here, and did different jobs. I mean, I did write the book about, illustrate about that book, and I got recipes from people in the community. But I worked at the Scottish Bakehouse. I worked at pools, chucking scallops. What else did I do? I did a lot of different jobs. And as I was doing these jobs, I also designed an exhibit for the museum on the maritime history of the Vineyard. And
Which was at the, wait, let's just get clear. The museum was not this museum.
No.
Yes,
was
let's just explain what it was.
Was the Martha's Vineyard
Historical Society in Edmonton.
or we used to call it the Hysterical Society. So, the directors didn't hear that. But all these different jobs that I had, I cleaned houses, I worked at a bookstore. The people that I met and the stories that they would tell me about the vineyard, some of them very quixotic, some of them just contradictory, some of them, their personal stories about their life just brought the vineyard history alive to me in a way that nothing else had. I'd read all the right books because I liked the vineyard, but somehow these personal stories just helped me understand the vineyard so much more. So I thought, I've got to start collecting these.
And what was the first oral history that you recorded?
I think the first oral history was Gracia. The first two were Gracia Harrington and Craig Kingsbury. So,
And talk a little bit about them for people who don't know those incredible characters.
yeah, but we could show those films. Gracia Harrington was a wonderful woman. She was born in 1885, and you'll see. I will show the film. She talks about the gale of 1898, and just to have, she lived to 1987. Was totally involved in politics, and she went to every town meeting. And when she wasn't here on the Vineyard, she was teaching delinquent girls in New York City. She was a powerhouse, and she was an Eldridge. So she also, when she was young, she had worked with her family, selling the Tide Book and working on the maps. And so it was just that story. They're kind of two bookends of the different kind of oral histories. This is a generality that I've been able to collect. There's just this view into a long ago time. I mean, and
She was how old when you interviewed her?
she was about 99.
Wow.
So
And this was long before you came to the museum.
yeah.
And what did you do? You knocked on her door and said, "I'd like to talk to you"? I mean,
Well, I had been living in a camp on Tashmoo that her niece owned. So I said, "Can you get me to talk to Grace Harrington, to your aunt?" And she said yes. So I knocked on the door, and she said okay.
and you had a tape recorder.
I had a tape recorder, and she said fine. So we sat down, and I did many interviews with her, and it's just they're so filled with wonderful historic information, wonderful sense of a character who grew up on the Vineyard, but yet was so worldly in some way. So it's just wonderful. So she's a good example. I'll show you the film. We'll do that first, and then of the tiny little stories that can tell you so much about the world then, but it's like 100 of what is in all the interviews I did with her. The second interview that I did, I decided I would do a story about did Craig Kingsbury bring skunks to the island. And do you all know who Craig Kingsbury is?
Well, why don't you explain for people who might not?
Craig Kingsbury was a wonderful man. He was the star, the person that sinks under the boat in Jaws. He was kind of Robert Shaw sat with him to learn how to be a concrete, craggy vineyard fisherman, but he was a selectman, he was a gardener, he drove teams of oxen, and his stories. So I was actually doing a paper for college on did Craig bring skunks to the island. So I went around the island and I spoke to people about, do you think Craig brought skunks to the island? And they would say yes or no, depending on what they felt about Craig. He was quite a notorious character. He seemed like a real big. He told me stories about prohibition that I'm not sure he was old enough to be doing what he said he was doing. But he also came from a very upper class New York family, but he became a farmer, fisherman, and selectman. And he had so much knowledge.
So oral histories aren't necessarily true.
No. And, so
Yeah.
when I talked to Greg, I would then I thought, well, I'm going to take these stories to the source and find the true versions of these stories, because people would then branch off into other Craig stories, or
and he's giving a speech to a bunch of geese.
always barefoot.
Yeah.
And they would tell me about the time that he dumped garbage down somebody's chimney because he didn't like what they had done, and just all sorts of stories I got. And then I categorized them by folkloric motifs. But I thought,
Whoa. How did you know what a folkloric motif was?
as I was going to college. So,
So you did this for a college paper. You were like a budding oral historian in college.
yeah.
Okay.
But I was older at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I had moved to the Vineyard after 1 year of college, and then I took some time off to go to college again in my early 30s, I guess. And so we did the first interview over his pig pen. I knew him because I'd worked at Scottish Bakehouse. His farm was right across from the bake shop. And I was kind of scared of him. He would come to the bake shop with these bloody sheep stomachs.
For haggis?
For haggis. He'd slap them on the counter and say, okay, Isabel, here's your haggis. And so, okay, I'll do it. And so I took all these stories to him over the pig pen and asked him his versions, the true versions of the stories. His stories were so much more outrageous than the ones I read from other people. And I just realized, the story is with the teller. And, oral histories were held in somewhat disrepute because it's not factual. But it does they give you a real sense of what a community is like, what a person is like. The story depends on who they're talking to. I'm sure Craig Craig would tell the same kind of stories to everybody, but a lot of people, it depends whom they're talking to, what story they tell. So
They might not be factual, but they were true.
They were true. They were true. Do you want to see?
Yeah, let's see Craig Kingsbury.
I want to hear about the skunks.
What skunk?
The skunks you brought to the island.
I didn't bring any skunks to the island, sweetie. Didn't bring them.
How did they get here?
I'll tell you what it is, pet skunk. Now, a skunk or any wild animal are the little fellas, they're cute, and they're little pets. But when they reach maturity, then they become rugged individualists, and then they become ornery, and they're no longer pets. So what happens is people get baby coons, little skunks, but a skunk, coons, baby bears, any of those little animals, after they reach maturity, then they want to be left alone. They're no longer pets. Well, in fact, I know one boy up at Seven Gates had one that he let go because it got mean. You can't pick them up or anything like that after that. They're tame, but they're dangerous. A gregarious herd animal you can keep. But your rugged individualists, your solitaries like skunks, coons, bears, bobcats, lynxes, any of them, you don't want anything to do with you. You're no longer the mom and the papa.
So
So that's how they got here, because the only thing is a pair came here in 63. And I knew they would tame, they were deodorized, and I let them hung around here. Some jackasses saw him, and they sent a fathead up here, one of the state boys, to catch him. I says, you son of a bitch, I said, you lay a hand on an animal on this place, I'll blow you to hell. Now get out of here. Leave them skunks alone. So that's it. No, I didn't bring him here.
defended their right to stay.
Right. So it's kind of a very varied answer, but and to replay Gracia,
Let me ask you one question about this.
Yeah.
Okay, you just played, what, 2 minutes or something like that. How much of Craig Kingsbury tape is in the museum?
Probably,
Tiny excerpt,
yeah,
right?
probably about 5-6 hours, 9 hours.
Last hours.
Yeah.
So that's the raw material of Vineyard history, and this is just a little taste.
A tiny taste of it. And this was done when I first started doing interviews. I had a terrible little Sony tape recorder, and didn't have a windscreen, and it was
We can hear
a
that,
little So, but his story comes through so powerfully.
Fair. All right, so this is now Gracia Harrington.
Now, this is Gracia Harrington. I think when I interviewed Gracia Harrington, I had a slightly better tape recorder, a TCD5 that Bill Honey at the bank had bought from me.
We loved to go out in storms, my sisters and myself. And it was Sunday morning. And the last of November, it wasn't cold, but it was this terrific wind and the snow. So we told Mother we should go and see if there wasn't any Sunday school. Of course, I knew there wouldn't be Sunday school, but we wanted to get out. So Mother was like, she came from the Middle West, and she never could understand why we liked to go out in storms. All I could think of was a hen who hatched a bunch of ducklings. But we went out and went down to the church. Of course, it was closed. And then we went down to the shore. We went down about where the Owen Park is. And we couldn't see. There was just snow, just this blizzard of snow, But there was a funny thing. There was a two-masted schooner that was right up on the beach. And the name of it was the Mary Eldridge. Of course, that was my sister's name. Isn't that a queer thing? But then, most extraordinary thing happened. The sun came out for about 5 minutes and shut right down again. And it meant that the men, the Vineyard Haven sailors, saw the condition of the harbor, and we did too. All these wrecked ships, some of them was just their top was sticking out of the water like that. And then, of course, the Newburgh had come around and gone through the wharf, you see, her bowsprit sticking out the other side. Can't imagine what it was like. So we went home after we'd seen all we wanted to see, and Mr. Edwards at the Bethel had a daughter about my age, friend of mine, and Mrs. Edwards said to me, could Mary come up and spend the night with you? She's so troubled about this storm, and she's so nervous and so upset. The Vineyard Haven men, went off in the dory. They got an old whaling dory and patched it up, and they went off and they rescued a lot of men, all the dory would carry, and came back, and they came into the Bethel and they were taken care of, given a place to sleep and eat and so forth. And Mary had seen them come in, and so she was in such an awful state that she came up and spent the night. I remember sleeping with them, she having trouble going to sleep and so forth. So all those men were there at the Bethel. Of course, they sent them home as soon as they could, but there were 75 men that were there for some time. Of course, the village helped to feed them. I suppose they slept on the floor. I don't know how they managed. And Mr. Edwards used to come up and say to Mother, well, we've done all we can. Can't you help us out? Can't you get a little entertainment up? And so forth. We're going to have ice cream and cake, have a sociable. So Mother said, all right. She always worked very much with Mr. Edwards. So my sisters, 2 sisters played the violin, and one sister sang more or less indifferently, but she had friends. I think they had a little quartet that used to sing, and I spoke pieces, and we used to hand around the ice cream and the cake, and so we went down when they had all those shipwrecked sailors. I remember very well a terrible experience, looking into the faces of all those men, thinking what they'd been through.
And that was the first interview that you did.
Yeah, and no, Craig was the first.
Oh, Craig was first.
Craig was first.
Okay.
And both of those interviews were done when I first started interviewing. I had only tape recorders. So they're cassette tapes, and these pictures were put in much later, but still they're very early on in my efforts to try to, make a more kind of accessible piece for people. There's something, at first I would play this audio pieces, and there's something I really love about audio, just plain audio, because it makes you create pictures in your mind, as you know well, working in
Audio is limitless, and video, it's just a rectangle.
It is, but it also has the aspects. You can see somebody's eyes.
Yes, of course. So I'm not belittling video. I'm just saying that with audio, your imagination adds a lot to it.
So when I used to do work with school children, which I used to do a lot, I'd always play them that audio, capricious audio with, didn't have any pictures on it. And I'd say, now close your eyes and just imagine what you can see. Then I'd have them tell me afterwards, and they had incredible stories that they had created from just listening to them.
And when you were doing these early interviews, what was the process? You fell in love with this particular form of history, and why?
Because, just to meet the people. I mean, the people were so generous, to share their stories and share their lives. I mean, I'd fall in love with everybody who I interviewed. I think that these stories, they, can tell us so much about a community, about the differences in the community, and about I think they can teach us very important lessons that will help us judge better for the future. What's special about the Vineyard, what we should keep, what we should change. My goal starting with doing the oral histories was really to get a sense of there's incredible ethnic and experiential diversity on Martha's Vineyard. And so to give a sense of that and give people a sense of that, and but also to get the stories from people who are not heard, that everyday stories. I think we also, we need to be listened to. It'd be so wonderful. At the beginning when people didn't know me, I had to kind of convince them to let me talk to them. And they'd say, I've not done anything important. I have nothing to say. I said, no, I just want to hear about your life when you were younger on the Vineyard. And, my favorite moment would be when, maybe 20 minutes into the interview, somebody would look at me and say, well, maybe my life has been interesting. Yes.
What do you think is if you look at these pictures, you can see that they're all old. But did you feel that you were racing to get these interviews recorded before these people disappeared forever?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, I still do, now I interview people of all ages.
Right, and
but
we'll talk about that. But this is
that was my. I think when I first started doing interviews here, there was really kind of a window on history that was opened. And people still farmed, or had grown up farming and fishing with methods that really hadn't changed substantially in a couple of 100 years. And, there was a kind of, they were tough people. I mean, it was not easy to live here before the Second World War. And I think one of the things that was particularly inspiring to me was, people kind of expected life would have joys, but it also have sorrows. And it gave them this sort of inner strength that, people of my generation, and certainly of the generations that have come since, we kind of feel like the world owes us something. But these people had this strength, and I just found it so inspiring. And also, I might be talking to somebody who had left school in second grade, but it was before the era of Google, obviously, television, before the era of that, and for the most part, radio also. So what people did was they visited and they told stories. So somebody who had a second grade schooling would speak so eloquently and could tell such a wonderful stories. The stories I collected in the early days were really just stellar.
How many oral histories do you think right now are in the museum that you've conducted?
About probably, I don't know, 14 to 1600.
Wow. That's what history is. You know, when I was in college, I wrote my senior thesis on the Federal Writers Project, which was part of the WPA, and they collected a lot of oral histories too. This is invaluable. Talk a little bit about what makes a good interview. What makes a good oral history? What have you learned about how to do these interviews that get you the information and history that you want?
I think one of the important things, when I go, I usually do at least 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5 or 6 interviews with each person. I feel the first interview is just kind of them, you get to know them, and people have different kinds of recall. Some people remember facts, some people remember emotions, some people remember visual things. So to get a sense from a person of, okay, what kind of questions are they going to respond to? But also I think the most important thing is for them to get a sense of you, and to begin to trust you and be, acting interested, which I was fascinated. I love to hear people tell stories about their lives, be they true or false. Not everybody. I'm only hearing some people tell their false stories, but so that whole kind of learning to trust between the two people. I think that's very important, and also just there are methods for. I do a lot of research when I'm doing an interview. And then I write it down into kind of an order that I think I might follow, and I would have 12 pages of questions. And, I always begin with where and when you're born. That's about it. And then I'll just branch off into whatever this person branches off into, what I kind of branch off to. I keep notes on my an example of one of them outlined there. And, and I think, it's a humbling experience, as you have to be ready to ask stupid questions,
There is no stupid question.
No, but yeah, when I work with kids a lot there, say, don't work researching, but don't look at your notes, just ask, listen to what they're saying and ask a question from that, but, because you want to hear what they say. Even if you know the answer because you've done the research, you want to hear in their words, because that's what's so special about it. To hear Gracia talk about how she spoke pieces, I love that. The wonderful language, the wonderful accents, and using, I think, also for me, one of the hardest things is silence. Just kind of waiting after somebody has started to talk. Because you're kind of waiting, to see, do you really want to hear more from them? So there are all sorts of techniques like that.
Talk about some interviews that have been particularly successful, and then if there were any that were real disasters. She asked me to ask her this question.
I'll begin with the disasters first. One of the things, and this is, it still happens, is knowing your equipment. So you get there and you don't have batteries for your tape recorder that are active, that work well enough, and that, or something happens with your tape recorder so it doesn't work. I was doing a Zoom interview with somebody during COVID, and I forgot to push the right button. So I lost the whole interview, of course. So, that happens constantly.
Oh, that's happened to me. I had to interview the DA of San Francisco like 3 times. It was an exercise in humility.
Yeah.
Because the first time I didn't have batteries, and I asked, can I come back and do it again? Sure. And then something else happened the second time. And I went back a third time. But doing that I felt like that was a real important, character building experience.
Right. And
So usually the disasters were technical.
no, not
Oh, okay.
always. I remember one time I was interviewing John Hughes, and I thought
Who was who?
who lived down the road here in Vineyard Haven, and he's in Cat Hall, I think.
The lobster catcher.
Yes, he started the lobster hatchery, and he was an incredible guy. But I thought I was going to interview him about the Derby. Somebody told me he knows all about the Derby. So I got there and I did all this research about the Derby. And I got there and said, okay, John, can you tell me about the work you've done with the Derby? I didn't have anything to do with it, which wasn't totally true. So I had to kind of just, at that point I've been doing it enough so that I could kind of make up questions as we went along. But other disasters, somebody, showing up late for an interview with somebody who was very fierce about what time you're supposed to be there. And so then they're mad at you and are they going to talk to you? So, there's all sorts of disasters that can happen, as you well know.
This is the part of the interview where we have to ask your personal story. So you did a lot of things between collecting those early interviews and ending up at the museum to make this oral history archive. Just talk a little bit about what you did off island and how those experiences kind of helped you become a better interviewer and archivist.
Yeah, I did do a lot of different things. I had been doing the interviews here on the island, and then I had, this always ends up kind of being a disastrous love affair that actually had to do with Boston. But so I thought, I'm not going to move back to the island. I'm going to move to Boston. And so I did different things when I lived in Boston. I worked for the Athenaeum for a while, Boston Athenaeum. What I did for a lot of the time is I had met the people who made the merchant ivory productions that made the Bostonians here on the island. And I started working as that director's assistant. So I worked on Room with a View and Slaves of Manhattan and another one too, which I can't remember. Did I write it down there? No. But so that was wonderful. And then I did some work with PBS, and I would have loved to work all the time with Merchant Ivory Productions because it was wonderful, but exhausting. But I only worked with them when they were in production. But that was so much fun. So in between times, I would get other commercial jobs or work with PBS. But then I started doing some volunteer work at a homeless shelter. And so I got into that, and I thought, well, they asked me to, Jim Ivory asked me to could work with them on another film that was being shot in England. And I said, no, I'm going to stay and work in the shelter, which I don't know why I said that. And then from that, I went and started working at an AME church, an African Methodist Episcopal church in Cambridge, creating housing for homeless families and programs for homeless families.
This was in the 1980s.
Yeah, in the early 1980s. And, and that was wonderful. I kind of coordinated renovations of buildings, but it was all done on a volunteer basis and all done on donation. I brought in the donations. I did a concert with James Taylor in Harvard Stadium and raised a lot of money. And that was exciting.
You know, I've known you for a very long time, but I never knew that you enrolled in divinity school. Talk about that.
Well, working with the St. Paul AME Church, I thought, oh, churches are, really good vehicles for social change. And I thought, well, if I go to a divinity school, if I go to school, that will help me kind of know the lingo. That, I'd gone to church growing up, but, maybe that would help. So I was enrolled in the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. And I also thought, well, maybe it'll really help me believe in God if I go to church and if I go to divinity school. So, and then I was, I'd come down here to kind of straighten up the collection. I had the 75 interviews, and went up to Boston to feed my family's dog for the day. And I had a terrible bike accident and ended up with a severe brain injury. So I landed on my head. I was bicycling. My tire got stuck in tracks going down Brighton Avenue in Boston. And I don't remember any of it, but I was in a coma for about 10 days. Then I spent about 3 months as an inpatient at a rehab, and then 3 months as an outpatient at a rehab, learning to do everything again, learning how to walk and talk and speak. And
How old were you at this point?
I was 40.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it was, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but it was a real lesson in knowing, helped me in some ways dealing with some of the older people when I went back to interviewing. Because, I could understand those kind of losses of memory or jumps of memory or what causes something to help you remember something. So it was really wonderful in that way. And also, one of the things that happened was they did a tracheotomy, a brachothyroidotomy at the accident scene and damaged my vocal cord. So, I couldn't talk for a long time. And so the kind of hoarse voice that I have now is not the voice I had when you first met me. But it was a real lesson there because I go to stores, once I got out, out of the hospital, and I have to write down, do you have thus and such? And somebody would write me back, we have it, it's in this, and then I have to write, no, I can hear, I just can't talk. And so you realize but then say it in a very loud, slow voice. And you realize what people with disabilities are subjected to all the time. So it's a real wonderful lesson in that.
So all these experiences made you a more empathetic oral historian? How did all those experiences affect your ability to do the work that you've done for the last 30 years?
I think for one, I didn't go off to California to divinity school because I can't multitask. I can't take notes and listen to something. I can't, there's still residue effects I had from the brain injury. So it brought me back here to the Vineyard. And I thought, well, I'll keep going with these oral histories. And yes, there is a certain empathy. It made me realize and value so much this precious thing we have, the life we have, and the experiences we have, and how everybody is so different. The people I met in the rehab, the different circumstances they were in. It made me just cherish life all the more and cherish the stories all the more.
So we're going to play some more of these, but I want to ask you a question about what you do with them. So you have hours and hours and hours of these interviews, and then you have to decide how you're going to bring them to the public. And are you going to make a book or a film? And so what about that part of it? You've got the raw material.
Got the raw
it's an
material.
incredible archive, but then what?
There are different ways in which we've used at the museum, or I've used over time, the oral histories, and it's varied over time. When I first started doing oral histories, I'd have print out an excerpt, and that would be up on the wall, and then there'd be a photograph that went with it. I mean, I have all along here, I have all the different kinds of media formats that we would use as we got more and more sophisticated. So first I do the exhibits like that. Then I thought, well, I've got to do a book. These stories are so wonderful. So I have 3 books that I've done. Vineyard Voices, More Vineyard Voices, and Vineyard Voices 3, and one about World War.
A World War on the Vineyard.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. World War on the Vineyard. You obviously, there were still a lot of veterans alive when you did these interviews, Creighton Reed and others.
Yes.
Well, he wasn't a veteran. He was a kid, right? Or was he?
No, he was a veteran. He was in Vietnam.
Oh, that's right. He was in Vietnam. Okay. So, yeah, talk about the Vineyard in wartime in those interviews.
Well, that was exciting because the Vineyard was really active during World War II, because it was one of the outposts on the East Coast, and they set up what is now our airport was a naval base, and there were naval army can't think of the word. There's a naval base up near Gay Head. There was one on Peaked Hill. There was one in Katama, and so people came flocking into the Vineyard to train here. The naval base at the airport was a training base for pilots, and so a lot of the people ended up staying here. Some of the people you see in these pictures ended up staying after World War II. But there was a lot going on. So to talk to in my book, it has people both talking about the experience here on the Vineyard, but also the people from the Vineyard that went off island to serve in the Pacific Theater or in Europe, and just what it was like to come from the Vineyard to be stuck in a horrendous wartime situation, and the strength that the Vineyarders brought to that. I mean, all the people I talked to, some of them had not talked about their war experiences until I talked to them, and I think they found it a really cathartic experience. And I certainly, I'd grown up being very aware of World War II because my mother's first husband was killed in World War II. And my father had been a naval pilot in World War II. So, I was aware of what went on, but to hear the details, to hear all of the different stories. I mean, I'm not for war, but it can be kind of fascinating to hear both the horror and to hear the courage, and to hear the.
What an incredible gift to be able to have heard those stories, and then a gift to be able to share them with everyone else. Do you want to play another video? What do we want to hear? Sword fishing, maybe, or?
Sure. I'll play two videos right now. One of them is another early video that I did, but it's for the most part, as I said, I just would do audio, but then every once in a while I'd raise enough money to get to pay a camera person to come and work with me. So the first video that you'll see is Eric Connell talking about sword fishing.
Yep.
These are all very short little interviews that I made for our social media, which is for the most part kind of lighthearted films, but that pack a punch. So.
You ask anybody, they ever went sword fishing, they loved it, really. As soon as it come January, I was ready to go sword fishing. It was a disease. Everybody felt the same way. I said, get a calm day. Swordfish will be here pretty soon. Everybody rubbing their hands. Well, you couldn't go after June. Everybody looked forward to sword fishing. Oh, this is great fun. From the time I could walk and talk, I wanted to go fishing. All I wanted to do. Couldn't wait to get out of school to go fishing. That's what I did, too. Real fine days, we'd go sword fishing. It was my job to steer. You'd be up on the mast. You could steer from up there and could stop the engine from up there. All the controls up there on strings. Didn't have anything fancy like they got now. When I did it, we had ropes. They run down from pulley, went down to the tiller. Sometimes you only two go. And you don't have much time, so then you'd take a piece of hose, garden hose, cut a couple holes and put a string through it, through a pulley with a weight. And you grab that, wrap your leg around the stay and slide down. You'd be coming from the mast right down into the swordfish stand. Slide in the stay, they always called it. Steer the boat for the fish, they pull out the stand, he strikes the fish with a harpoon, you throw a little barrel with a line that goes to the harpoon, then you lower a dory, the fellow gets in the dory, picks up that keg, you've got a line runs from that keg to the lily. And the lily hopefully is inside the fish. You get the fish anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours and a half. It's kind of hard to describe. You just hang on to it. If he wanted to go, you'd have to take him, and you'd take him back. Then he'd go a little. You get a little more and a little more. And then first thing you know, he'd get another lease on life, and away he'd go. You have to let him go way out again, start in all over again. You'd wear him out finally. Then you go up alongside and hauls the fish in, gets him up, ties him alongside the dory, get him back aboard the big boat. Then I help clean them, ice them down. When I'm harpooning a swordfish, I like it on the left-hand side. The striker wasn't any better than the man who was handling the boat. The striker got all the credit, but if the fellow handling the boat didn't know what he was doing, he might not get you anywhere near him, you know. Every man had a job, you know. If they didn't do it right, then you didn't get the fish, that's all. Of course, now they're catching them a long line. They're catching them 7 or 8 pounds. That's why there isn't any swordfish. Because they caught them all. Catch them before they get a chance to grow. They never should have allowed it, but they got a big lobby. The longliners have got a big lobby. They can't seem to stop them. It's cruel, but they catch them little bitty fish, you know. Even worse, they got them now, they can't bring them in unless they're a certain length. So they're dead, they throw them more than the sharks eat them. Don't make any sense, you know. I'm glad I went when I did. You think you're going to get rich, but you don't. Then you think you're going to starve to death, but you don't do that either. I wouldn't miss it for the worry.
That was great.
Yeah, Eric was.
You want to stay with him?
I get to hear it again. I could listen to Eric forever. I mean, I love his voice. It's it just music. Most people like interpret music to my ears, but Eric was born in 1917 and he died in 2010, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And somehow in that, I mean, he's talking about old methods for fishing, but to hear his heartbreak about how badly, what happened about from the long lining. I mean, that helped me understand. I've read articles about, changes in fishing, but somehow his personal angst about, and not angst, that's not the right word, but his pain about it just made me understand it so much better. He also is a wonderful person. I did many interviews with him. He also could remember sign language from the Chilmark Deaf. So I have another film of him.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You did some very special projects, deaf community, African American community, the civil rights leaders who were here. Talk a little bit about how you came to do those. These aren't just individuals, they represent communities here.
Right. Well, we had an exhibit here at the museum on the Chilmark Deaf community. Does everyone know about that? And
just explain what it is.
well, there's it's interesting. Now there are kind of two explanations of how it started. It was always said that Jonathan Lambert came to the Vineyard from Kent, England, and his family had the recessive gene for deafness, and then he moved up island, And because of the isolation of the island, there's intermarriage between cousins and things like that. And so this deaf gene spread all through, mostly up island, not entirely, but, Nora Gross wrote a book called Everyone Here Spoke Sign Language, which not everyone did, but certainly up island everybody did. So it's wonderful to see he can do all the signs, and he talked about how he would cheat with his friends playing cards because he was sign for cards. So,
But how do you do oral histories with deaf people?
well, I wasn't doing oral histories with deaf people because the last person who had that deaf gene died supposedly in the 50s, but it's through my oral histories, I've met some people that have introduced me to, introduced me in story to relatives of theirs that were part of that gene too, so it went longer. They're now, and he died in the early 70s, so it's a fascinating, what you should do, there is the Martha's Vineyard Museum Oral History YouTube channel. And there's a whole section on people talking about their experiences with people that were deaf and, showing some of the signs. They're wonderful to watch. And then also through all of the years, I've been able to, I did a lot of work with Nora Gross, who wrote that book. So we're just starting to process it, her collection of all the injuries that she, which is very exciting. Took me 20 years to get them here, but we got them. But there also is a whole other school now of people who we have been working with that it actually came later to the Vineyard, that it didn't come from Kent, England, that gene, but it was, how was it started? It was, I'm not quite sure, I think the details on that, but that was always the story that people told. But they're saying that began later on in the 1800s, and which makes it an inherently Vineyard sign language. It wasn't from.
Oh, it wasn't.
It wasn't
whatever it was called, National Sign Language. Yeah.
Well, no, it wasn't National Sign. There was a unique Vineyard sign language because of the isolation in the Vineyard, and it was a great language for the Vineyard. If you're fishing, you can sign to somebody in another boat about where not to go fishing, where you're finding the fish, or if you're trying to call your husband, who's out, plowing a far field to come to dinner, and then you can sign to them. And so Chilmark Sign Language got sort of assumed by American Sign Language, but the people who say it came later saying that it was the basis for American Sign Language. So,
and talk about your interviews with the African American community.
Oh, I've always
tons of them.
Tons.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the experience of people who are African American. I mean, just like everybody here. I mean, they're wonderful experiences. I've always been drawn to their stories, and actually, we can play one of them right now. So this is an African American woman who I interviewed quite recently. So this was shot last year.
Granny loved to drive. Her father taught her how to drive when she was 10 years old. She always had a car. Her brother was a chauffeur, and he worked for people who owned a car dealership. He could always get a deal on a car for my grandmother. And so she always would have a car, and she had this wonderful Woody. And we would come down from Boston. In the old days, we came on the train. But when she was finally able to drive us all down, we would get all the way to Woods Hole, and then she would tell us, and we had the dog in the car. And whatever else she found that she wanted to bring to the island, okay? Which was
5 kids.
with 5 kids and food and clothes and, you know, a new sewing machine or whatever she wanted to bring. So we would get to Woods Hole and she would tell us to get under the blanket. And she would drive on the boat as one passenger and a car. And Sheba, the dog Sheba, would be under the blanket with us. You know, can you imagine? I don't know how we survived because you had to, and because it was important to Granny that we be under that blanket to get out. And then once we got on the boat and you could get out and just go upstairs and just breathe in the air and watch, you know, see the sea. It was just wonderful.
That's exactly what we did when we were going. My father did. You know, when we got down to the ferry, okay, girls, get here. Here's the towels, get under the towels.
Oh, God, that's obviously people had to do it in those days.
Right.
It was, you know, it wasn't, you know, the money was so tight that they could even get to come here. But leaving, you can imagine packing up the house for the winter, because the house wasn't winterized in those days, and getting in the car with the dog and the kids and the clothes and everything, and getting out on time to catch a boat. We left Labor Day, but for some reason or other, whenever we had to go to Vineyard Haven, and I can remember mostly going to Vineyard Haven to leave, going to Vineyard Haven and knowing you were late, and Granny's got her pedal to the metal. I mean, and she wasn't a good driver to begin with. There are stories about her driving too, but we would get to the Oak Bluff, where the Oak Bluff side of the bridge starts, and she would start beeping the horn. We're coming, we're coming, we're coming.
And would you guys yell out the window, wait for us, wait for us?
Oh, yeah. It was part of the party. It was part of the plan, you know, here comes Granny again, wait, you know. And I guess they would say, what the heck is coming over the bridge, you know. It was just the Coleman clan. And darn if they wouldn't wait a little bit. I mean, you know, that's a part of what you miss, you know, nowadays, is that there were just certain things that went on because it was a community, you know? I mean, and I'm sure nobody at the boat said, oh, here comes Luella. They were very considerate of the people who were riding back and forth. When my sister Stephanie passed away, she wanted her ashes buried at sea, in the ocean between Woods Hole and the island. And in those days, they would stop the boat in the middle of the water, middle of the trip, so that you could throw the ashes on the side. They did. That's what they did. So.
Josie comes from a very is the author of a wonderful book called Home is Where the Heart Is.
The place my heart.
The place my heart calls home. About her experiences here on the Vineyard. Her grandfather, as you saw in that the video, was known as the Dean of Boston Negro Theater, and was one of the, so it's a very artistic family. But I love that piece because it's, except for my camera work on it, but you know, it's funny. I mean, Jossie is so funny, but you know, there's a real poignant part to it, you know, that, and it reminds us how the Vineyard has changed in this subtle way. I mean, it subtly reminds us how it's hugely changed.
And what are you racing, if you were planning if you were going to do this for the next year, what stories would you be racing to record before these people disappear? In other words, what do you think are important pieces of Vineyard history to archive?
Everything is pretty important, but you know, I'd like to do more interviews with the Brazilian community. With the, I've done some, and more interviews with people, the immigrants that are coming in now from Eastern Europe and from, you know, that just what that experience is. And just before COVID, we were starting to, Laura and I were starting to set up workshops to train people to collect oral histories, because I thought, well, if you're from a community, you can do a much better interview than I might be able to do with that community. So people in that community.
Well, let's talk about that. You've done projects in the schools here. What does that involve? Training people to do this work?
Well, I'm training people to do it. I started working with younger kids in the schools. This was back before we had an education department here. And, my desire was to, move the learning world for students outside the four walls of the classroom. So we'd go and would visit people all over the island and do interviews. And it was wonderful because it also helped, especially with young kids. For some kids, they were really good at doing the camera work. Some kids were really good at asking the questions. Some kids were really good at putting the exhibit together afterwards. So it was really exciting because it kind of worked to all the different talents, or brought out, because these kids were young, their talents that they maybe didn't know they had. And I was told by a number of parents that it got them excited to be going to school.
That's great.
So doing more, I've done, when Black Lives Matters, that whole era, I did a lot of interviews with people who were involved with the Black Lives Matter, efforts here on the island. So just getting more of the diversity of the island has never been my goal to get the famous people on the island. Although I have interviewed some famous people like Brooke Styron and Alfred Eisenstadt and things like Kate Taylor. But that's, mainly is just to get the stories we don't always hear, to help people understand what the Vineyard is made up for, because it's changing so much. There are many more types of people coming to the Vineyard, and I think especially for the people who are maybe now are coming and getting property on the Vineyard as an investment, just to remind them that there's something more to the Vineyard than nice scenery and cocktail parties. And so I think
what are some ideas that you have for making these oral histories more accessible? You talked about the YouTube channel. I mean, there are all sorts of things that you can do now that you certainly couldn't have done when you started.
Right. So I've done, a number of longer films that are out and about. I'm not great at pushing my product, so they're not out and about as much as I'd like them to be. The books, I think, is a good way to get things out there. We should do podcasts. We should do all sorts of things like that. I mean, one of the things that the oral history program here needs is more volunteers. I mean, here we have this incredibly huge treasure trove of transcripts. We have a lot of them now transcribed by automatic software. These need to be corrected. They need to be indexed, and so we can always welcome people to come and do that.
Are there volunteers right now working on this, or this is
a couple? Yes, one sitting right here in the front, Irene, and there's some, I think, in the back there too. And it's so important because all these things. I'm often hearing people at some event here on the Vineyard saying, well, we don't have anything about thus and such. I say, yes, we do. We have so much in the oral history, but they're not that accessible. We need more and more work and people's time to help make these accessible.
And they're not digitized. In other words,
most of them are just.
So can you go online and see the index of oral histories and then click on whichever one you want to listen to, or how does this work?
It doesn't work right now. We're still working on that. The library, we used to be able to do that when the collection was smaller, but once the collection got so huge, it was just too much and so that's something that the museum will definitely be working on over the years. So, and I'm willing to work with anybody who wants to volunteer to work on, correcting these interviews, because it's fun. You learn a lot. And these treasures have to be out there for people to understand and hear.
And the reason we're here is because you're retiring. What are your plans?
My plans are to keep collecting oral histories. So, you haven't seen the last of me. I want to do another book because there are so many people that I've interviewed just since the last one came out. These stories are wonderful that they need to be made. A book is a good way to make it accessible to people, and these stories need to be put onto paper, especially, I think, and especially for the people who are, each week I hate opening up the paper and seeing who's died, who I haven't put in a book yet, or I haven't done enough interviews with. It's just like, it's a perfect career for a guilt-ridden New Englander. And so I'll be working on another book. I'm also going to be working on a film with between the museum and Mystic Seaport on some of the films that were taken in the 30s of the grain races between Liverpool and Australia. And I had done an interview, terrible quality interview with somebody who had taken these films, so to put those together. So I'm going to be busy. I'm hoping, I'm thinking that all these interviews will they should be housed here at the museum. So I will continue to do that, just not getting paid.
We're going to open it up to Q&A, but are there any other audio excerpts that we haven't played yet? We've heard the ones you have. Okay. So it's
and there are many more. So go to the Martha's Vineyard Museum Oral History YouTube channel, and you can hear a lot of them. Not all of them, but they're fun to watch.
So, yes.
So, Linsey, first of all, I'm happy to hear that you are actually going to do another book. I'm thinking, oh no, everything's going to go video and digital. But I enjoy the printed page most of all in terms of getting into your oral history. So, thank you. My question is, I know from interviews that I've done for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I maintain a connection with those people who are still living just because, for a brief moment of time, there was, a certain touching of their soul. So for you interview these individuals for hours. How has that impacted your ongoing relationship with those individuals or their families here on the island?
It does, but once again, the guilt-ridden New Englander, I'm always thinking, I haven't visited Olive Tomlinson in 2 months. I haven't, there's so many people that I would love to spend time with. There's so many people who I'm feeling like there was such a close relationship. And with my work schedule, I haven't been able to do that. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to in retirement. I'll have more control over what I'm doing. So to spend more time with the people who, as I said, I'd fallen in love with. So, but it's
vice versa.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's hard. That's kind of the bittersweet part of doing oral histories for me. So, yeah.
So, Linsey, it's great hearing these stories of yours, and I'm wondering if anyone sat down with you and taken your oral history.
Yeah.
Other than Mara.
Well, that was in
Mara,
1976.
of course.
Yeah.
I think the museum has plans, do they not, for you and Indaya to interview me? Yeah.
Linsey's in every oral history, so don't worry.
And I'm always kind of dropping, like I did with Jossie on hers. And that's just what my father used to do. And kind of so if you read all the transcripts, of which there are 50,000 pages of them, or whatever it is, you would learn about my life. Yeah.
Linsey, one of the extraordinary things about your books, thinking about how much went into each article, is how you managed to condense so much information into the voice of a person and make it feel just absolutely normal, as if they were talking from beginning to end and it just said it all. Do you have anything to say about that? Because I think it's a great skill of yours that maybe we don't realize just because it seems so natural.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, in what is like 3 to 5 pages in a book, one of the Vineyard Voices book, comes from maybe 150 to 200 pages of transcript. And so it's not everything that's in there. I have to pick and choose. And for me, it's important to have the story told the way it was told. So I do some editing, but I have to edit out whole stories because I want it to be captured the way that they speak. I mean, my audience, my most important audience when I do a book is the people in the book, that they're happy with what's in there. So I remember I was
talking to review before it gets finalized. They do.
Yes, they do, and that can add a lot of time to things. I go, somebody say, I ain't never said 8. So it's a balance. It's a balancing act, and as I care about what they think, I won't get rid of all the 8s, but I might reduce some of them. That's just one example. Yeah, it's a hard task. It takes me a long time to do a book, and it's painful, but I have to leave out. Yeah, John. Yeah.
Number one, I want to say thank you. And when I see these, I know at least 90% of those people, and I've talked to them in my lifetime. And it just brings back how lucky I was to be born here and be with those generations of people. I have relatives there, I have school teachers there, I have fellow veterans there, classmates. And just thank you. When I sometimes start dumping on the Vineyard and how it's changed, I can look at these and it just reminds me how lucky I am. And thank you for doing it.
Well, that's why I do it. And I hope everyone who reads a book or looks at an exhibit at the museum, well, they'll have that same reaction, even if they didn't grow up here.
Yeah.
What's special about this place? What is this community? What's
the other thing I did, real quick, on your first book, I went to as many of the people that you interviewed, and I had them autograph the book.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much. When I first got here in '75, living years around, I had a job, a seated job, which was a federal job at the time, as what was called a chore worker. And what that meant was that all the seniors in each town had a list for the chore boy, which was me. And once a week, I would go to each town 1 day a week and rotate it around like that. And so I was living in Aquinnah, which I still do, and I was in all of my friends' grandparents' houses and getting to know them in a way you don't when you just meet someone on the street or in the bar or at a club or at an event. You're in the house, you're seeing their photographs, you're seeing their paintings, you're seeing the way they're dressed, the way the place is put together. You really get to know somebody. And I felt that I had, such a wonderful education that way from that tour that I did for probably 2 years, from town to town, hearing all of these elder stories, and then becoming my friends and taking me in on their stories, and so what you've done is sort of institutionalize or formalize that, allowing everybody to know all of these elders, and the elder wisdom is being passed on that way, and that's a fabulous thing. Mm-hmm. And then to just one other thing that I took about a month ago, I took 2 weeks and I read your third book from cover to cover, which previously I'd always just opened up and, oh, there's something interesting. But I read this from cover to cover. And I've been chairman of various regional island things, and always when the idea of, I'm going to use the word regional came up. Yeah, it was always a fight. If you use the word regional, you would have a fight with trying to get something done. And I experienced that in at least 3 different situations over a number of years. And then when I read your 3rd book, I understood why. Because in it, there are at least 5 or 6 individuals that, including Ann Bassett, that's one I remember, who were part of the time when the high school was brand new. And before that high school was built, apparently from what I read, there was so much rancor about doing this because all of the towns were so egocentric about who they were, and there was so little communication, again, your demarcation of the Second World War, but up until after that point, there was so little interaction amongst the towns that it was this terrible idea that you were going to be going to a school, if you were from Eggertown, going to a school of people from Vineyard Haven or vice versa. and so that word, that I found out that it was that furor around the high school that created this fear of regional. Anything regional was a real problem. So, yeah.
And if you go back to the first book, I mean, you realize, what it really was born in. I mean, people I interviewed back in the early days, they might have lived in Vineyard Haven. They hadn't been ever to Eggertown because, you had to go.
In their whole lives.
In their whole lives. They had to go and, well, maybe as they got older and cars showed up, but it was before the era of cars. So you didn't travel outside of your town. So that's what you knew. So, yeah. John?
Bravo, Linsey. Thank you so much. And as Mara elicited from you, thank you so much also for your capacity, your resilience, and for bringing to your interviews and to everything about your work, all of your experience, not all of which has been a lot of fun. Pursuant to which I wonder whether you would, and thank you, Mara, for doing this, but could you elaborate at all beyond your early comment about oral histories being the poor cousin within history in terms of once you became involved with the Dukes, to me the late lamented Dukes County Historical Society, how things have changed for you with respect to the institutional approach to your work?
Well, I think, just island-wide, just read the newspapers now. Oral history's become a much more important thing. There's so many articles about people and where they've come from. I think people have begun to realize, and if I had a little part in it, that would be wonderful, that it's these, these flavors, these eccentricities of people, these, contradictions between people, that's what causes, for example, that's what causes wars. I mean, it's not the facts. I mean, it's these different attitudes that help us understand our community and help us understand that these variants of stories are very, very important to capture. They're not facts, but they tell us what life is.
Can I follow up maybe and make that question more pointed about the support you've gotten? I think that's what you were trying to get at, from that have vineyard institutions like the Historical Society and now the museum come to have a bigger understanding about how important what you do is. Is that where you were going?
That was a good part of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think they appreciate the oral histories, and we integrate them into our exhibits as much as we can. It's always as an institution becomes larger and more institutionalized. There are different groups. I mean, I no longer can edit all my interviews, which I feel that I find very difficult. It's hard to have somebody else edit something that I've done. I can edit occasionally, and that's wonderful. But the museum is doing such wonderful work and putting so much out that they things move at a pretty fast pace. So I think they totally appreciate them, and I'd love to see them put more money into the. I wish I had an assistant all the time. It's wonderful. But yeah, I think everything always changes. But I've been very lucky to work with the museum and have watched the incredible change that have happened in the museum and how it's become much more sophisticated and I kind of like it's kind of a jumble, but sophisticated and reaching out to so many more people and so many different attitudes. I remember when I first started doing the interviews with Brazilians, it was what I wanted to do was to do an exhibit on Brazilians. A lot of them were not legal, so I wanted to have them faceless in the exhibit. And the person who was the director back then, no names mentioned, said nobody would be interested in that. But now that kind of interest is coming through and is here now. So the museum is doing fantastic things, and I love to think that the oral histories have been a small part of that.
Yeah, look, oral histories are living history. I can't think of anything that's more vital to understanding what happened in the past than hearing somebody tell you what happened in the past in their own words.
Right. Yeah.
What you do, I think, is amazing. First of all, to get oral histories into a book, to me, and condense that down, the time and effort that you put into that is kind of blows me away. But to be able to literally hear the voices in the museum, I was driving a long road trip, listening to NPR probably 10 years ago. They may still have it, but there was an awards thing for telling a story about something. And one of the stories was a young man who never met his father. And so he never knew what his father's voice was. So he interviewed in this condensed story his mother, his aunts, and to try to get a sense of what his father's voice really was, And we have a close neighbor that you actually interviewed, and I can't tell you how many times our family has listened to your interview of her, and it brings us right back to her, but her personality, the time that she lived, the things that they did, back when she was a little girl, and so I just think, what you're doing is amazing. I think more transition to, the voice, from the book to the actual tape that you've done is
actually what I would love to do with my next book, and I don't, I'm going to have to raise money to do another book, is to have a little QR code for each chapter where somebody can hear from the person, and maybe see a little video, or just the audio, because to hear a voice. I have pictures of people looking at exhibits, listening to a friend of theirs' voice who has passed. Tears.
Oh yeah, it just completes the picture of that person and the times he lived in.
So I got to have somebody help me figure out how to do that. A book with QR codes.
I would just, it's all fabulous, but I was just wondering if you had any stories of families or people or young people who had thought about, because of your inspiration, recording people in their families for that very reason, to be able to kind of have that. We all have regrets that we haven't done that with our own parents and grandparents, or to a very limited extent. But I just wondered if there were any stories of that kind of nature that you...
Yeah, I think some people have. I do, which is wonderful. So, but it's always hard with your family. You always think they're going to be here,
Yeah, exactly.
And
that's a good message.
Yeah, so I mean, I luckily did interview my mother and father and aunts and grandmother, but you know, it's hard to kind of get that time to interview your family. But yes, people have, and so if I always encourage people to do that. So, and then give the tapes to the museum, because we do have a lot of other collections. I mean, probably here at the museum now we have, what did I say? What was the number I was coming up with?
1,700?
No, probably around 2,000.
Oh, yeah.
200 interviews with people. I've done outreach for other collections, and all need to be transcribed and corrected.
But all you need is a phone.
All
you need is
yeah.
your cell phone.
Yeah.
I mean, the barriers to entry of collecting this information are basically non-existent.
Nowadays, yeah.
Anybody can do this. Just, you know, anybody can do this. And you don't have to go out and buy anything. It's just, you know, click on your phone and you can record your grandmother.
Right. So everyone who's thinking about talking to someone in their family, talk.
I'm just curious, have you tried to tap into something like the Community Preservation Committee grants?
What?
The Community Preservation Committee.
Yeah, I have gotten grants over the years, but now it's not my decision to apply for a grant. The museum has to decide to do it.
Okay.
So.
Do we have one more? One more? Yeah. Or maybe we could have more than one more. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's very clearly the case that there's a strong correlation between your involvement, your work, your involvement with the museum in its various manifestations, and an incredibly significant and wonderful transformation in the scope and nature of the exhibits that the museum has and how it's oriented to the community. And I would argue that categorically there is a causal relationship here. that what you've done, the nature of your work, the stories you've told, and the people whom you've brought into the consciousness of the island has been fundamental in changing it much for the better this museum and the island.
And hopefully the director was listening.